Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the PropertyNow podcast. I'm sitting down today with Andrew Blackett, the licensee and part owner of PropertyNow. How are you doing, Andrew?
I'm good, Jesse. Hopefully we can kill some myths today and educate some people about real estate, particularly private selling.
Yeah, so I thought it would be a good idea to go over a couple of the myths that we get asked a lot and talked about a lot by potential sellers when we're working in PropertyNow, and a lot of things that I suppose agents and even just everyday people tell them regarding selling their own house, usually privately, and you know the myths surrounding that. So yeah, we're going to try and debunk a few of those, or talk about them and see if any of them have any sort of what validity they have, if any. The one thing, well, not the one thing, but one of the first things that comes to mind in regards to these myths is the database.
Oh, the database.
The good old
mythical database that agents have.
Yeah, so would you like to talk to us a little bit about that and what it means when a real estate agency tells us that they have access to a database?
What it tells us is they'd like to get your listing. Yeah. Okay, now I'm not saying that they don't have a database. I mean, PropertyNow has a database. Everyone has a database. The question is it exaggerated? And the other question is, if there is a database, who owns it? In other words, let's just use an example, a random example, Ray White, LJ Hooker, Rain and Horn, it doesn't matter. And let's say that they have a database of people. Maybe. But that database, generally speaking, comes from realestate.com and Domain, meaning that those agencies get the inquiries from the two major portals. So therefore, logically, the people in that database are looking around with all agents and all private sellers. Yeah. In other words, they're looking on realestate.com. I don't think many people these days simply just go to a single agency in the hope that, unless it's a buyer's agency, there might be a case for it. But generally speaking, people just look on realestate.com and Domain, and then they contact whoever that is. So any database is owned by everybody.
Pretty much, I guess it's not so much that the database itself is a myth. It's more so kind of what the implication is, that sort of they have access to it and nobody else does, or that people are only going to come through, they're only in that database, whereas they're pretty much looking on realestate.com and Domain once a week, maybe even twice a week, and it's really open source, kind of everyone has access to it.
Yeah, it's like Stonehenge isn't a myth, but, it gets exaggerated a little bit. So it's what they, agents, we're not anti-agent. We fully respect agents. We just want to provide a different platform. But agents obviously want a listing from you, and they've got to make a case for that. And in making the case, they will suggest that they've got this large database. Look, maybe I was an exception, but I worked for Ray White, LJ Hooker, Rain and Horn, Star Partners in Sydney, and others, Elders and so on. And I don't recall ever having any kind of sizable database or any of the agents I work with having any sizable database. And in the instance of all those companies, I think in my whole career I got one referral, because sometimes, an agent for, let's say, LJ Hooker might want a listing and say that we've got this LJ Hooker referral system. LJ Hooker is a great company, but all I know is that when in my time with them, and same would be for Ray White, that and anyone else, I got one referral in 10 years from all of these different offices. And the agents typically don't even like the referral system, because you get 20% if you're the person coming in, if you're not doing the controlling of the listing. So it's just exaggerated, Jesse.
Yeah, I think the way people go about finding their properties and inquiring on properties has changed over that period since you worked in those companies as well. Like, people are so much happier now to get on like an app on their phone.
Well, it was 1903.
Yeah, so that's not to put your age on blast, but people now, they get on their phone on realestate.com, download the app, and they submit an inquiry that way. And so so I'd have to put somewhat of a line through this one. It's not debunked. It exists, but it's not really of any particular benefit, and it's not really exclusive to anybody. It's something that everybody can do.
So it's a squiggle. It's not a direct line. I like it. Yeah, let's go with that.
So moving on to that, from that one, let's talk about negotiating. Now, this one is huge. I think the main selling point, probably the main selling points for agents when they're talking about, why you should go with an agent as opposed to private selling, is that, one, they will get a higher price for your listing. They will sell it for more and you'll get more money. And two, they're going to alleviate a lot of stress for you. Those are probably the two biggest factors I think that I hear from customers. So let's talk about those. Any truth to that?
Well, I agree 100%. Again, what I hear people asking me, or people telling me that they've been told, is that agents are superior negotiators, and that on top of that, negotiating is stressful and time consuming, worrisome, whatever you want to call it. So let's look at the two things. So are they superb negotiators? Well, again, just drawing on my own experience, we have to do CPD points every year as agents. Every agent in Australia, well, most states have to do CPD points. Some states don't have to.
And can you let us know what that...
Compulsory professional development. It means that, you've got to study every year and sort of prove your worth to fair trading in that state. So in all the time that I've been an agent, none of the courses offered to me by the CPD companies that provide the courses have really touched on negotiating in any meaningful way or at all. And also in my experience with agents, I've not seen any display of massive negotiating, expertise. But let's again presume that it is a thing. Let's say agents are better negotiators. I don't believe that, but let's pretend. So let's take a typical property in Sydney. Let's say an average house in Sydney. Let's say a $1.5 million property in Sydney. Okay. So at a 2% commission, 10% of 1.5 million is 150,000. So 1% is 15,000. So 2% is $30,000. So if you're selling a property in Sydney at $1.5 million, that agent who gets you, let's say, an offer of 1.5 million, you can either pocket, if you're selling privately, you've got $30,000 extra to play with, or to pocket, whichever. So in other words, another way of putting it is that agent has to be
a better negotiator,
$30,000 better
to break even.
Even. They haven't made you $1 yet. They haven't bought you a cup of coffee yet at that price. So you can sell at 1.3, 1.2, and still achieve the same result as the 1.33 or something. Yeah.
So all the time you're working at these real estate companies like Ray White and LJ Hooker and all these places that you worked, was there at any point where you had to educate yourself in terms of negotiating specifically? Like what sort of work did you have to do or study in this respect?
Well, this is a myth because when you come on as an agent, you're taught a mantra, and the mantra is list and last, right? It's the first thing I learned. I started my career in LJ Hooker Wagga, and the first thing I learned on the first day was list and last. It wasn't just alliteration, but you weren't told sell and last, because every agent knows, may not admit, but they know that the crucial thing you've got to do is list. If you've got 30 to 50 listings as an agent, something's always going to be selling. So the emphasis is always on being a good salesman to get a listing. In other words, being a good lister and, but not
being a good negotiator and seller with the seller. As opposed to the buyer.
Exactly,
Right.
Now, there might be some flow-on effect from learning skills around that, but again, it's not been my experience or observation that agents are particularly good at negotiating, It's a pretty big claim that, sort of you're a master negotiator or something, but you kind of need what's the citation of that? Where's the evidence of what can you base that off? Exactly. Well, I mean, the logical thing would be testimonials from clients, and in our case, we've got about 2,700 that that have said that they've done just great. Now, agents do say that, and this is not an agent bashing exercise, I just want to be practical. Agents say that they get a higher price. This is one of the things that they'll tell a private seller. How on earth could an agent prove that they got a higher price unless the person was private selling first at X price and then they got the listing and sold not only at a higher price but enough to take the commission into account. But we actually can prove the opposite, because what often happens, as you know, Jesse, is that people sometimes come to us from agents and they've been listed at a certain price and then sell in excess of that. True. Yeah. Or they get a valuation or 3 appraisals perhaps and sell in excess of those appraisals. That happens routinely. So we can actually prove it, and we have got proof of it. It's hard to prove the other way around. Therefore, I wouldn't place too much stock in that argument. Yeah.
I mean, it sort of comes down to that first point you mentioned as well, that they have to get at a higher price to a degree that covers the commission just to break even. That's pretty relevant and somewhat damning. So you'd want to hope that they are extremely good negotiators.
They need to be the top of the game and acting in the best possible way. to break even. Because I always believe that no matter how you sell, whether you sell privately or with an agent, and it doesn't really matter to some degree which agency, might matter which agent, but it generally doesn't matter which agency or whether you're private sell, in the sense that the same person is going to end up buying your house. The same person is going to see it.
Right.
The same person is going to largely pay what they believe they can afford and what they believe is value for that house. And it's going to really come down to that. So the best that a private seller or an agent can do is to streamline that process a little bit, or allow them to agree with themselves. They want to buy the house. It's hard to stop somebody buying a house when they want to buy it. So there's a lot of exaggeration around about the importance of who's selling it.
Yeah, I'd probably have to put the red felt pen through that one.
Yep.
I think, it's not to say that you can't have an agent who is a great negotiator. That's, obviously true.
Of course.
And I'm sure plenty of them are. It's just that, as you said, you obviously have to, you're starting at a baseline, you must achieve a higher price than what you would selling, and not an insignificant amount either. It has to be a really notable amount.
Yeah.
Straight off the bat as well. I was always getting a little bit off topic here, but I was always curious about this sort of idea that you can have an agent who maybe what's the typical amount of listings that your regular sort of agent might have?
A good agent would want to have at least 30, I reckon, in his own personal purview, because that way something's always selling. In terms of an agency, a moderate-sized agency would be 30 to 50 listings. A large agency, in a major metro area might have 100 listings.
Right.
That'd be a big agency, We've got 2,700, so that's interesting. Yeah.
So I was always curious, and I've actually never really mentioned this. I'm not sure if you'll agree with me, but I feel like if you have an agent who is managing and trying to sell like 20 different properties, it seems somewhat strictly inferior than having the owner be solely dedicated on selling their specific property.
Yeah.
But, it's always sort of this selling point, like, look how many listings we have, but I don't want you to sell other people's properties. I want you dedicated to selling mine and focus on selling my property, which obviously for an owner who's selling their own property, that is your sole focus all of the time.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's just a thought that's just sort of occurred to me, and has occurred to me a few times.
It's a good thought. But just before I address that, I just want to correct something I said a moment ago. I think I said we had 2,700 listings. I was thinking of our reviews. We have 2,700 reviews. We've got over 1,000 listings at the moment, and that in itself shows you that people are doing this just fine, aren't they? They're doing their own negotiations.
Yeah.
We've got a negotiation service, and only a reasonably small percentage of people take it up, which says to me that they're doing just fine.
Doing it, yeah.
But now back to your point. So if you're an agent, you're looking after 30 listings, and I've at my peak I probably had 30 listings. Then it's difficult, and every owner thinks that you're the only listing they have.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's surprisingly hard to look after 30 listings and do them justice. So as a private seller, you've got your one house to look after. You will follow up every contact. You'll answer every email or answer every phone call or get back to people. And the reality is it's just difficult for agents to, we've all heard stories, and I've had it happen to me where they don't get back to you quick enough. I'm still waiting for someone for a year.
When you're selling it, like that's the most pressing moment.
You got to jump on it. Yeah,
almost in your life. I think it's a very stressful sort of process.
Biggest purchase of most people's lives, and you don't want to waste one inquiry. And it's the same in property management too. By the way, your average property manager will look after up to 150 listings, and that's so difficult. Whereas if you're renting your own property, again, just like selling one property, it's totally manageable.
Yeah. Next myth. Let's say buyers don't want to deal with owners directly. They're uncomfortable with it. They want to deal with an agent. They don't
Sorry, you made me laugh. Yeah, I hear that. I mean, come on. I mean, every year, and I say this as an agent, I'm still a licensed agent, so I'm part of what I'm describing. Every year, there's usually around Christmas, they do a survey of the most loved professions. And that'll be AMBOs and teachers and maybe doctors and nurses.
Things along those lines.
All of those people, the life-saving people. And then they do one of the most hated, and apologies to all the lawyers and solicitors and the used car salesmen and the real estate agents out there, which I'm one, but they're the top three every year for the last 30 years. So this idea, this is why I'm laughing, this idea that people will want to only deal with an agent who they all profess to hate and don't trust, this is generalisation. versus an owner is preposterous, you know.
Yeah.
Do you ever play that game when you're a kid, you know, that musical chairs game where is it called musical chairs, where you say something and then you pass it on to the next person?
Chinese whispers.
Chinese whispers, sorry. Yeah, not musical chairs. Thank you.
Very different.
Very different. Yeah. So Chinese whispers, by the time it gets back to after 4 people, everything's diluted and changed.
Yep.
So with selling a property, there's the purity of dealing with the owner and the buyer. Nothing in the middle to, dare I say, corrupt the message. You know, you're getting purity of feedback. Now, the feedback might be your house is too expensive, or we don't want to pay that much, or don't really want a house with stairs, whatever it is, or like the swimming pool, don't like the swimming pool. But you're getting the purity of message. You're not having it sanitized or lost. Yeah. So this idea that people don't want to deal directly with the owner that's a myth.
Like it's possible that someone has that that feeling.
It is.
I'm
you
sure
know why?
someone does.
You know how I know? Because in our 17-year history of PropertyNow, it actually happened once. 2 years in, it happened twice. I guess it was early in the piece, but 2 people in the course of a year actually rang me up and. Actually, they didn't ring me up. Our clients told us that they had heard that a couple of people didn't want to deal with the agent. They rang our clients and said, "Oh, I'm not dealing with you. I want to deal with an agent." Yeah. So 2 out of probably 30,000. But the interesting thing is, I said to our clients, "Well, that's okay. Just ring them back and say it's no problem. Like you can put an agent into the equation, but now the price has to go up $30,000."
Right.
Surprisingly, they declined to go that way. You know. So
yeah. I mean. Again, it's sort of one of those vague ones where it's definitely like a myth by and large. Of course, these people exist somewhere, but I've worked in property now.
Like the Yeti, he probably exists, but we just don't see them.
I've worked in property now for about 5 years now, and definitely, no exaggeration, I've heard and seen a lot of reviews and talked to a lot of clients who have said that the person they ended up selling to much preferred dealing with the owner than they preferred the direct line of contact and speaking with the owner. Frankly and directly, as opposed to an agent. And
we're getting that information obviously from people who've succeeded and people who are happy, both buyer and seller. It's a little sanitized. True. But I agree with you. That's what I hear all the time. Yeah.
Another one is, and this one is, I don't really know where this one comes from, but it's that your listing won't look professional if you list on your own, whatever that really means.
Yeah, what does it mean?
I don't know. It's not going to look. I don't know.
Well, I guess what they're usually hinting at is the signboard and the name and logo. I think.
Well, I can only sort of think of the it being
the layout,
the sign, because I mean the agent really doesn't do much else. They're not going to take the photos. Usually you can get a photographer yourself. To be honest, sort of a side point, but usually if you have an iPhone, you can take pretty decent pictures with that nowadays.
Yeah.
But of course, getting a photographer, that is not something your agent is going to. He's not going to take your photos for you.
No, generally not. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I suppose the copywriting and the banner on the listing that has the agency banner.
Yeah, exactly. And they may also be referring to just the general layout of the ad, because some people ask me, and you've probably been asked as well from intending clients or potential clients, will a PropertyNow ad on realestate.com look the same as an agent ad? Yep. I think that's kind of what they're getting at, and the answer is yes. Is it as big? Well, you can get a bigger ad with us if you want to. We give people a standard ad. So I think they're looking at the layout, the name and the sign. Now, in the layout, your private sale layout, as you know, Jess, is exactly the same as every agent's layout in Australia, and it doesn't change. The size can vary because you can get larger ads with us, just as any agent can give you. We really carefully chose our name, PropertyNow, to sound official and sound like an agent. I always tell people that I use the analogy of when doctors, just when they become doctors and they raise their hand and take the Hippocratic Oath, and one of the parts of the Hippocratic Oath is first do no harm to your patient. Don't kill your patient is rule number one. And when we chose the name PropertyNow, we wanted to first do no harm. We wanted to sound like an agent. We are an agent. And we wanted to look like an agent, and just not to put anybody off. No one's more proactive than we are about private sales, but we didn't want to put anyone off.
Right.
So the name's great for that. It's been a real buzz around PropertyNow, the name-wise, and the signs. Signs look good. They don't look like a for sale by owner type of sign. You know?
Yeah. I mean, getting on realestate.com is the part that sort of makes your listing look professional in and of itself. Just getting on the platform is sort of the step.
True.
And then there's really not much else that that an agency offers you that you just can't achieve elsewhere, either with the copywriting. The layout's going to be the same.
Yeah.
The photos, as we've already spoken about, you can get this done in a plethora of different ways.
Yeah.
So, I would have to...
Well, realestate.com deliberately, and Domain too, go out of their way to standardise the ads.
Yeah.
You'll never see bolding, italicising, or underlining.
No.
They want it generic.
I have a lot of clients trying to put like HTML coding on there, italicize things, bold things, and I say, I'm sorry, you can't do it. They want it all like homogenised, all the same, looking the same.
So that works in the private seller's favour, because it means that your listing looks precisely like an agent listing, and it is an agent listing. It's just an agent-assisted private sale.
People often don't know until they're actually contacting, and the owner tells them, "Hey, I'm the owner of the property. You're dealing with the owner right now."
Yeah. And you know what? Just on that topic, people often ask us, don't they? Should I tell the buyer that I'm a private seller? Absolutely. What are you going to hide it? Why would you hide it? And if you did hide it, it's going to come out at some point, and then you're going to look sneaky.
You look deceptive. Yeah,
exactly. This should be really proud of it, and people really respond extremely well to it.
Yeah, generally they do.
Yeah. So don't hide it.
I would double down on that for sure. There's no point. It will come out at some point, and then the second that happens, you do look like you're hiding something. You're deceptive. So just steer well clear away from that behaviour. It's not in your best interest.
How many red lines have we got now?
That's 4 out of the 5.
4 out of 5.
The final one is I've got no time. I can't list it. I need someone else to sort of do it for me.
Hear that a lot. Well,
people are very stressed.
Absolutely.
In society.
So rather than wondering whether you've got enough time, and it certainly doesn't take much time, or whether it's stressful, think of it this way. Every part that I can think of private selling has a corollary with agent selling. For example, let's say you decide, I don't want to private sell because the idea of negotiating makes my stomach churn.
Yeah.
Well, you don't get to not negotiate when you go with an agent.
You're still selling your house. You're going to have to discuss that and negotiate at some point.
It's even worse. Yeah, you're discussing with somebody who's got skin in the game, the agent who's getting a commission. And if, let's say, using that fabled $1.5 million property in Sydney, and I come to you as an agent with an offer of 1.3, and who knows, maybe it's worth 1.3, maybe it's worth 1.4 or 1.5, but I now need you to drop $100,000 or $200,000, so that I get a commission.
Yeah.
I'm not going to state that, of course, but it's going to be at the back of my mind at the very least. So you're now having a negotiation with your agent who, is not an ambivalent.
They're not completely impartial.
They're not. No.
That's not even a slight on agents.
It's not.
It's impossible. When you have potentially tens of thousands of dollars at stake in your commission and stuff, you can't be totally unbiased.
Correct. It's not a slight on them at all. What we're saying is that you don't get to not negotiate. Yeah. And let's say you don't get to not keep your house tidy. You still have to keep your house tidy. You don't, you're either showing somebody through your property, or you're vacating or having somebody through while you're there with an agent. So it's not like you get to not have inspections. You might be at work and, the inspection's done when you're at work, of course, but still got to present the house and so on.
Can you think of any validity to that? So anything that by listing with an agency you can avoid, or that takes a large deal of pressure off you to do?
I'm trying to think of something. The first thing that comes to mind, and it's not valid, is the conveyancing. People do have, this is definitely a myth. A lot of people believe that agents do the conveyancing, or that they do the majority of the conveyancing. I can tell you, in my whole career, all I've ever done at best, and it was infrequent, is the front page of a contract, and then it goes straight off to the conveyancer. So I think one myth is definitely that, if you're selling with an agent, that they take care of the conveyancing.
It has to be done with a
pretty nonsensical. Yeah, it's got to be done with it's a conveyancer or a solicitor, or in Western Australia, they call them settlement agents. Yeah. Now, one thing that changes is when you choose as a private seller, you choose a solicitor or settlement agent or conveyancer. you choose one that has a trust account so they can hold the deposit. Whereas when you sell with an agent, they may or may not have a trust account, but they want the deposit to come in so that they can secure the funds from the sale on settlement day. So in other words, the agent is not doing the conveyancing. They're just a little bit of a tiny conduit, if that, to conveyancing. So I'm just trying to think of anything that about private selling, and of course I'm biased, that doesn't have a similar thing that you have to do.
So I suppose, answering questions about the property if the agent knows them.
Yeah, true.
You sort of remove that sort of aspect and they can answer them themselves and you don't have to respond to it. But that's kind of only...
That's actually really good, Jess. And I think the reason that didn't occur is I see that as an advantage, because if you're asked, if you're asked a question about your property, you know it way better than anybody else, and and you can be just truthful and be yourself, But that would be that's fair call.
Well, if it's a question that you, the owner, don't know, then your agent's not going to know it either. So
correct.
Either it's an easy
probably
question, it's an easy question that you can probably just answer the inquiry yourself, or your agent's going to have to ask you anyway. In which case, you do have to answer it regardless.
Exactly. And it's so little work to find out what your rates cost. That's a thing that might be asked, and it's so little work if you've got a unit that's strata titled to just go to the body corporate and ask them what the body corporate fees are and what the sinking fund is at and things like that. So they're not big stressful things. They take 10 minutes. Yeah.
Well, I'd have to put the pen through that one as well. So I think we had about 3 that were really big myths, and then 2 maybe a little partial, as you said, a little bit
squiggle. Of exaggeration, a little bit of gilding the lily.
Not the whole story.
The Blarney Stone.
But there you go, straight from the horse's mouth, our top 5 myths in regards to private selling. So thank you very much for joining me, Andrew. And I hope you all enjoyed listening and I hope you learned something. Thanks very much for joining us. Signing off.